This is Janjo, and I'm building a deck, yeah! Hey everyone, this is Jesse from the Janjo Zone here for another deck profile, and this time we're tackling the 2004 Chaos format, specifically the August variation of it. I know there's a couple different aspects of 2004 that people may play, but we're going to go off of the 2004, like the World Championships, like the main Chaos format. So when it comes to Chaos formats, it's crazy. It's absolutely wild. I explain a lot of it in my 2004 Chaos history video, why that is, more in depth, more in detail. When it comes to this one though, it's TLDR, there's just so many cards. There's so many great cards. In older Yu-Gi-Oh, there's a lot more simpler cards. You didn't need to have giant paragraphs and paragraphs of text explaining how special summoning works and this card summons this card, you can add this to your hand, but once per turn. There were cards that had longer effects, but a lot of them were fairly simple in terms of what they could actually do. Noble Crossout banishes a face down monster. Delinquent Duo discards 2 cards. Stuff like that. It's very simple, and there's a absolutely ton of just power cards in here, which makes kind of deck building, it's fun but also hard at the same time, because how many of these just broken cards do you add? And when you take in consideration how many broken cards you need to add to this, it kind of hurts deck variety in that way too. If you look at decks from back in the day, about 95% were the Chaos decks. They were the Chaos decks that revolved around Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning, and Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End. The Chaos engine, that being light and dark monsters. You banish them from your graveyard to special summon these powerful monsters. And there's other fantastic cards. I mean, really the spell and trap cards are like the MVP. And it also kind of hurts at the same time too, because then you're kind of forced to have these cards in it, which can be a good or bad thing. Bad thing in the sense that you can't really experiment with other kinds of cards like you see in later formats, and that there's just so many good ones. Do you add as much as possible, or do you select very specific ones? What do you do? Do you do 3 Mystical Space Typhoon and Mirage of Nightmare? Do you add Snatch, Steal, and Change of Heart? There's ratios and stuff in other trap cards. Like, do you run Solemn Judgments? Do you run Imperial Order? Do you run Bottomless Trapple? Like, there's still options to be had with these powerful cards, but it's also the case of, well, what do I like better? What kind of works with the deck? It's a very tricky format to build decks, and I kind of learned that while I was building this deck. This is my Plant Chaos deck. Because my initial build was more of a plant water deck, but I figured you kind of have to go Chaos in this format. There's just no other way. So Plant Chaos was the way I went, because it still kind of works in that regard, and it's all based around this card, Fairy King Truesdale. Now, I initially got this idea from someone from my Discord, which I'm sure I'll probably mention the comments. When talking about Fairy King Truesdale, is that when he was initially printed in North America, it was that his effect reads that while this card is in defense position, all plant-type monsters you control gain 500 attack and defense. But when this card first came out, it was translated incorrectly, where it didn't need to be in defense mode. So you could summon this very powerful monster. Now in Europe, it was fixed when it was released later, much later in the year, I believe. But it wasn't until the following year when we would actually get a reprint for Fairy King Truesdale. Now, unless I just can't find anything, I can't find any resources that say it was quickly errated like a misprinted Neo Daedalus, which I've done a day 1 deck of, or some sort of weird mystery errata like Lord D, which I mentioned in my Legend of Blue Eyes format history video. So with Fairy King Truesdale, that's kind of interesting, and that's why I decided to do this in the Chaos 2004 format, because I really wanted to make a Fairy King Truesdale deck for quite some time now. It was a case of me never getting around to it, or I just couldn't really find the right build. But when I kind of found that out about the original errata of that, and going off of my day 1 Neo Daedalus deck, I thought, hey, that'd be kind of cool. And Plant Chaos seems kind of fun too. I mean, you don't really see plant decks in any old formats. Plant cards just really kind of sucked. I mean, you may see Lukunga in an off deck once in a blue moon, but that's kind of about it. I mean, the only really one you would actually see is Mystic Tomato. And even in modern decks, if someone's running a Mystic Tomato, unless it's like a Recruit or Chaos, you may even just see one in a deck. With Fairy King Truesdale, you have two goals, or actually really kind of three. One, make your broken 2004 no ban list deck, because remember, this is before the ban list, so there was a limited list, but no ban cards. And two, you have to build your plant engine. And then three, you gotta work in your chaos engine. And to make all that stuff fit was definitely a challenge. The build I have is obviously the build I'm going with, but this is not to say this is the final build. This certainly was not my original build. I had plenty of cards I tested with, plenty of cards that could be adjusted here and there, and if you have any adjustments for it, definitely let me know, or even post your deck in my Discord. In terms of the card lineup, I'm obviously playing Black Luster Soldier and Chaos Emperor Dragon. I'm not running Yata just because I didn't really have great room for it, and this really isn't like the main strategy of the deck is your Yata lock. So I decided to not run Yata, and you actually see a lot of decks around this time didn't run Yata either. Maybe it's just a sign of good sportsmanship, you could say. But still, like, both these cards are just absolutely absurd, so you kind of have to run them. The DD Warrior Lady, most decks from this format you do see run 3 of. Just to fit it, I think 2 was a good amount. I do like having the option to just banish cards, and that's great to do to get rid of your opponent's light and darks, because the big thing, you have to play around chaos. Like, that's just, we're not going to ignore that just for a dumb gimmick deck, which, I mean, hey, we could. Maybe I'll post other variations. When it comes to Fairy King Truesdale, 2 is a good amount, 3 is too bricky, 1 is like, why are you even playing it if you're running 1? But with 6 stars and essentially 500 attack boost, it's 2700 attack, that's stronger than a Summon Skull. That's great. It is funny, though, how Fairy King Truesdale isn't even a fairy-type monster, but that seems like that would have been the misprint, was that it would, like, maybe in the OCG it was supposed to be, someone wanted to be fairy, but they figured, well, if it's going to boost plant-type monsters, might as well help itself, because its defense is pretty weak. Maybe they could have swapped its attack and defense and made it a fairy-type. That sounds like that's, like, more what the original concept probably should have been, but hey, I'm not complaining, because this is the busted deck we're working with. Working with 2 Kaiku the Ghost Destroyers. A lot of decks I saw at the time only run 1. If GOAT format has proven anything, that Kaiku is a very strong card against Chaos. You can banish cards from your opponent's graveyard, and your opponent cannot banish cards from the graveyard either. So that's really great. Again, it works with DD Warrior Lady in keeping that your opponent away from summoning their chaos monsters, and that is a great strategy. So I definitely wanted to run 2 in this to combat against that. I did have a build where it was more of a plant engine, but you have to fit the 2 together. When it comes to chaos, you need that light, you need that dark, and you also need that anti-opponent strategy as well if you want to have any chance of winning. Next, we're going off with 2 Lukungas. Lukunga Bongo. He's the effect that you can banish 2 water monsters or summon a Lukunga token. It's not too bad, but his main thing is that with the 500 boost, he does have 2200 attack, which is really high. Which is great. He can be searched with Witch of the Black Forest, as many of our cards are. I mean, Fairy King can be as well. But we're mainly using Lukunga for its just high attack, because with that boost, it can beat over like a Berserk Gorilla or really any other normal summonable low-level monster. Next, we're running Lord Poison, which is the other cheeky plant card. I think he's actually pretty good in this, because again, he gets up to 2000 attack. His effect is actually more useful in this regard, in which when he's destroyed by battle, you can target a plant monster in graveyard except for himself, except for Lord Poison, and special summon it. So you can get back Lukunga, you can get back Fairy King Truesdale, which is a great recursion for this card if it gets destroyed, which makes Lord Poison really great. It also brings back Mystic Tomato, which we'll get to in a second. But we are playing one Magician of Faith. This was the last card I added to the deck. I think I initially had Yugioh in it, but I took it out for Faith just because there's so many great spell cards we could get. If I had more room, you could run 2 Faith, kind of ideally, but I also just really wanted that extra light target because we don't have a ton of light targets in the deck. So I feel like Faith was a good thing. It's a good knock target because you're not really worrying about knock otherwise. This is the only flip effect monster we're running. And Deity Warrior Lady, it's going to banish itself, and Blackluster Soldier, you need to get out to begin with. So Faith is good. It's always been good, and just having that extra light monster helps. But then we're going Mystic Tomato, which is the last of our plant monsters. You could run like different ratios of like Lacunga and Lord Poison if you wanted. You could run 1 Lacunga and then 2 Lord Poisons, or 1 Lord Poison. But I wanted to run a fair amount of plant monsters just to make the engine worth it, to get us the full value of what we can do. And Mystic Tomato, I don't want to deal with Asura Priest either, which is why I'm running 2. But again, 1900 attack boost, or that 500 to get to 1900 attack, is really good. Plus, with Lord Poison, that you can revive Tomato, which means you get more dark searches. With Tomato, you can summon a ton of monsters out. Spirit Reaper, which is a Black Forest, another Mystic Tomato, Sangan. So you do get some targets, which again is also why I'm not running 3, because there's not a ton of targets we can really search out with it to special summon. But we do have some options with it, and we can recur it with something like Lord Poison, which is, if Lord Poison could target itself, it would definitely... I don't know if we might run 1, we might run 3, just because we keep reviving. It would be absolutely broken. But 2 Tomatoes is great. This is probably like the key card with Fairy King Truesdale. If you really wanted to like cut a Lacunga for another tomato, that's great. Lacunga, you can banish Fairy King Truesdale. You can banish another Lacunga or Lord Poison to get that token out if you want to push for a little extra damage if you need to. Because if you have direct attack with its 1700 and its 700 attack token, that's 2,400 points of damage, which isn't too bad. Of course, we're playing Sangan, which is just great for searching out. Same thing with Witch of the Black Forest. We're playing 1 Shining Angel. Its really only target is going to be your Deity Warrior Lady. Just another light target is great. And in fact, we can search one of these banished cards out. It is also great. That just kind of gets through our deck that much quicker to help our light and dark engine. Sinister Serpent, we can use it with Lacunga if we really wanted to, but it's just kind of good to have just that kind of stuff in general. I tested a little bit with something like Tribe Infecting Virus, but I wasn't really feeling Tribe. I mean, you could cut Serpent out, but it's just nice to have that card if you need to discard stuff with. If your opponent has used like Delinquent Duo, or if you use Graceful Charity or Painful Choice, like there's things you can still use Sinister Serpent with, which I like. What's cool with this, which we're with Fairy King, which we're not doing in this build, but Big Wave, Small Wave can get Truesdale out, which he could use with Serpent. So maybe my Discord, or maybe for a future video, if you want to see that, let me know. I can make like a goat format, like defensive water build, water plant. So that could be kind of fun. I just like the art of the card. It looks really cool. I like all the colors and just the design of it all. Spirit Reaper, we can go with Tomato. You can search with a lot of things. It helps just have a good defense. We can rip cards out of the opponent's hand. We could use it to just like summon out to tribute for Fairy King Truesdale, which that's pretty much like the main way you're going to get it out is by tributing. So a card, like Tomato into Tomato, or Tomato into, Sangan or Witch and tribute for Fairy King, that gets searches off, or Tomato into a Spirit Reaper. That's not too bad. Lord Poison can also get out another plant monster like Lacunga or Tomato. So again, we can tribute for Fairy King. So there are ways to get Fairy King Truesdale out. And Spirit Reaper is a great utility card in general, but also good for this, which is why I'm running it. Again, Witch of the Black Forest, like Sangan, just a great card to have in the deck. Having stuff that can search just about anything out is just fantastic, and which really kind of is like the better version of Sangan. in terms of its target pool. So these are the monsters I went with. When it comes to spell and trap cards, what you see is what you get. I'm pretty much running as many broken cards as I could muster. There are other cards you could run, like Change of Heart, another Nobleman of Crossout. You could run the Mirage and Nightmare engine. I'm not running it. I'm not the biggest fan of that engine. I'd rather just have like one MSC, a Heavy Storm, and like maybe side out a second or third MSC if you really wanted to. I think there's enough cards that kind of search stuff out, and enough power cards in this Snatch Seal kind of takes the place of Change of Heart. Right? Rather, you can take control of a monster indefinitely. Like, I don't care if they gain 1,000 life points. If I can start getting advantage, that's great. Painful Choice is great to dumping water monsters or plant monsters if we need to, or Light and Darks or Serpents. A lot of things we can do with Painful Choice. It's one of the most busted cards in the entire history of Yu-Gi-Oh! And, I think a lot of them kind of speak for themselves just by looking at them. When it comes to the traps, as I go with just a lot of the staple ones you see in Go format, with the addition of Imperial Order if we need to negate certain powerful spell cards, like if we're running into a Harpy's Feather Duster or Pot of Greed Comeback or a Raigeki, pretty much anything that we need to. You could run a Solomon's Place if you really wanted to, but Call Haunted, again, it's good because we can use that to revive a monster to potentially tribute for a Fairy King Truesdale, or a Recruiter card, or a Searcher. Mirror Force, Torrential, Tribute Ring, and Destruction. These are just good destructions if we need to use them. And that's kind of the main thing about the traps. Like, if we need to use these cards, they're there for like that utility sake, and that's what I really like about them. The Chaos format is a crazy format. I really want to make a bit more decks in the Chaos format, as well as a ton of other retro formats. If there's a specific format you want me to do, let me know. It definitely was fun to build, to try it. There's definitely a challenge in a lot of the older formats that there's not a ton of decks. There's not a ton of like videos or archives online for variety's sake. So a lot of these are just kind of my own creations. I just tested and just made what kind of felt good to me. It just feels good to have a build that just feels good. And for the most part, this does feel good. I'm not saying it's the perfect build, but it's what I'm going with for the time being. So let me know what you think about this deck. Would you ever consider maybe just running this fun build? Obviously, it's not going to be a meta build, but it's just like a fun, more casual Plant Fairy 2004 Chaos build. And just the absurdity of the Chaos format in general. So let me know what you think about it, what changes you would make, what decks you would like to see in the future, or formats. And, share this video if you know someone who really likes this format too, or may find enjoyment in the video or the Janjo Zone channel in general. So, of course, until I see you all next time, have a wonderful day.
My grandpa's deck has no pathetic cards, Kaiba.